Surprised that they're not going to develop a test like that. They're going to have genetic markers. Okay, this one's going to be this and this one's going to be this. And then you run into this situation where you get to play God and pick and choose. You know, if you're
who comes into the world and who doesn't.
If you're looking for a perfect child, guess what?
They don't exist.
They don't exist. Yeah, I've talked to your father. He's got something different to say.
This is gonna hurt. It's time for the Suffering Podcast.
We are born into a world never knowing anything different than the abilities that we're given. With very little difficulty, children are able to run, talk, learn, and associate with those around them. Parents get to enjoy the small victories that their offspring make with very little effort. Take away a capability and the game changes. The loss of a limb may make activity a challenge. A developmental restriction may limit the ability to talk or curb learning. Change appearance, and the association with those around them may be altered. A child is a child, regardless of any special needs. Being born with limits, restrictions, or without does not make those children bring any less joy. On the contrary, they bring an added perspective to further appreciate what many may take for granted. I'm Kevin Donaldson here with Mike Failace, and on this episode of the Suffering Podcast, we sit down with Todd Smith to discuss special needs athletes. This is the first time in the history of this show that we removed the word suffering from our title, and that's because of the joy these kids bring. Todd, thanks so much for traveling all this way to come and sit with us.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get into anything, let's talk about our marquee sponsor, and that's Toyota of Hackensack. We buy our cars from Toyota because we don't trust anybody, and we know we can trust them. So go to toyotaofhackensack.com and let them find you a car. Todd, we've waited probably, what do you say, a year and a half?
At least, it's over a year.
And we've had you scheduled multiple times. You're a busy dude. So, having you in here to discuss this topic, which I know is very dear to Mike's heart because he talks about Special Olympics constantly and his involvement and the joy that it brings him.
Well, you know what, and that's the reason I wanted Todd in here, because Todd emboldens what Special Olympics is all about. I mean, I've never met someone with a bigger heart than Todd in all of my life.
It's a tough thing, It's bitter. It's a bittersweet because athletics, to bring certain things out in children on all walks of life, there's nothing better for it. And I'm a big believer in that. And your son, what's your son's name?
Jake.
Jake.
He's
he's like Special Olympic glorified. I mean, you see Jake. I mean, he's like
the poster child.
He really is. I was going to say poster child, but I didn't think that was.
I did see one picture of Jake before you came in here, and it's you in uniform hugging him. It's a very beautiful picture.
My favorite picture ever. My favorite picture ever.
All right,
it's you hugging Jake, and we're gonna put that up.
Every week we take a question from one of our audience members. This week we get one from JoJo55, and JoJo writes, "How do words hurt?" And I thought this was an apt one for you because there is a word in the special needs community that is as volatile as any word out there. But before we talk about that word, how do you think words can affect and change people's perspective?
People that don't know athletes, I don't know, it's kind of like a stigma. I don't know if they're afraid of them or they just tend to back off a little.
Well, they just don't know.
Yeah, it's fear of the unknown. It's human nature.
Yeah.
Well, it's very easy to label something and categorize something. It just makes things fit in our minds a little bit better. And, I don't know this for certain, but I think a lot of people who misuse words do so because that's either how they grew up, and I don't know whether they do it out of meanness.
Hey, some people, it's their norm.
It's how they were taught. You were taught with different vernacular than you're allowed to use now, I'm sure.
Like I said, though, it's the fear of the unknown. If you don't know the word hurts, does it really hurt? Right. I mean, growing up as a kid, if someone called you a jerk, what does jerk really mean?
Good point.
Now that we're older, if someone calls us a different name, it's really not going to hurt us as much as it hurts when you're a child.
So one of the greatest stories is that book right there, 14th and 2nd, by Charlie Cifarelli. He's a good friend of ours, and Charlie had an addiction problem when he was younger. And my common vernacular, because of being a cop for so long, was they're junkies. Well, that's changed. All right. And I was changed by Charlie. It's like, you really shouldn't be calling them junkies because they have an addiction. And as somebody who had an addiction, I had an addiction. I understand that. Like, nobody wants to be called a junkie.
No, I do too.
Yeah.
I didn't know you could be addicted to penis.
Do we make 30 seconds?
Mike, what do you think? How do words hurt?
I forgot that 30-second rule. Like I said, words can hurt. Whether you may mean it as a joke, something may come out of your mouth just as a jerk, or as a joke. Like I said, I may call you an idiot, or I may call you something that to me is just common vernacular, but to someone else it may hurt.
Calling somebody stupid.
Yeah, calling someone stupid, calling someone an idiot, calling someone stupid. Those words may hurt someone because you don't know their mindset at the time you're talking to them, at the time you're saying that to them.
If they don't have a high confidence level.
Yeah, exactly.
Like us, we've been around and, police officer too for 30 years.
Yeah, exactly. You've been
And
called,
I grew up in North Jersey, so.
You've been called every word in the book, But do you think that criminal that was calling you those words, do you think that criminal actually thought those words, or was it just coming off the top of his head, or do you?
Oh no, I'm sure he was trying to hurt me.
Well,
Yeah,
there's two. So
Absolutely.
That's my portion of it. There's two different types when you use harmful words. There's two places that it comes from, and it all has to do with intent. All right, there's those people who grew up that way. Where I grew up, the section of New Jersey where I grew up, we were all different races, but we called each other those races. We did.
Absolutely.
We called each other those races, but there was no intent behind it. It was like, I'll call you this, but nobody else can call you this. And then there's the people who do it to hurt you, that criminal you were talking about. Or if somebody is trying their best to get a rise out of somebody, they may use inflammatory vocabulary in order to evoke some sort of emotion.
Get under your skin.
A little bit of a bully.
Yeah.
Right. And it's more times than not, it works. It works. But you're also doing it here. In all fairness, when people do that, they're doing it to people who they know can defend themselves.
At least you hope so.
I used to call it all the time. I'm half Italian, so I got to say it. You're getting my guinea up.
Mm.
But if someone called you a guinea, or called me a guinea, I'd be pissed off. But it's getting my guinea up, which means I'm about to get fucking pissed off.
My favorite
I
was
grew up in Pollock Valley. Across the street was Guinea Heights.
now my uncle.
We had all those sections: Mick Hill, Guinea Heights.
One of my uncles grew up in the Polish section in Brooklyn, and he married a Polish girl. He's an Irish guy. He used to go. He liked to fight though. He used to go into the bar.
Imagine that.
Go figure.
He used to go into the bar and tell Polish jokes until somebody fought him. And that's an example.
Sounds like where I grew up.
That's an example of somebody using that inflammatory vocabulary.
Goads them into it.
Well, there's only one Polish joke. The rest are true. I'm sorry for all the Polish. It's a joke.
I'm gonna get Diana in here. Diana's gonna kick
She's
your
gonna kick my
ass.
Not the first time I got my ass kicked in the studio.
We have a good friend who was actually born in Poland, and she took it kind of rough in here. So this episode has been a year and a half in planning, and the funny thing is, I had the original outline that I drew up for when we first proposed you to come in, and although it's very similar, a lot of stuff has changed in here because we've learned a thing or two about where the direction of the show we need to go in order to change people's minds, which is kind of what we're going to do here. We're going to open some people's eyes.
But you know what, Kevin? I mean, it comes down to hurtful words. That there are certain things in Special Olympics because, obviously Todd's involved in the Special Olympics community and so am I. But you're not as involved as we are, and we know the hurtful words and the catchphrases that we really can't say. When we were prepping for this show, we went through a whole thing about you can say this, you can't say that, you can't say this.
Well, let's get that out there. We all know the big word, and we're not going to say it because we're not going to give credence to that word, but it's the R word as it relates to children with special needs across the board, not just athletes. And it also was a nice little segue from our social media question. That word, it's my understanding, is as bad as any racial term out there, inflammatory term, and I think it kind of goes back to they don't. A lot of the special needs kids may not have the mental acuity to A, understand that somebody is saying that, or B, the the fortitude to fight back. Would that be a fair statement, or do they know?
Oh, they know.
They know.
Oh,
absolutely.
once that word is said in front of Special Olympics people, I mean, it's
They
it's
know
like
when people are being talking down to them
Yeah.
or derogative or absolutely.
Well, that word, what kind of weight in the community does that word hold? Is it fighting words?
oh, it's definitely fighting words.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's the word itself is just, slowed down.
Yeah, I mean,
And
it's in a
it's like-
dictionary.
Yeah, it's
You
like
know,
every
it-
other word that,
yeah.
got
It's-
twisted and bastardized and
Slow growth. Yeah, slow growth, but they changed it to mean slow growth, but a lot of ways the special needs kids are above everybody else. In a lot of ways.
absolutely.
They love better.
Without doubt, 100%.
Well, what I tell people, they never learn racism, they never learn hatred. They're always happy, they're always cared for. So who got screwed?
So who should the R word apply to? It's probably
Everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably
I mean,
us.
growing up, we used that on each other.
Well, there's another
Oh,
one.
without doubt.
There's another one as it pertains to Down syndrome kids, and I use this term because one of my cousins has Down syndrome. They were Mongoloids, and that was
Yes.
the accepted term, and there was nothing. There was no hatred behind it. There was no, and it
There was no ill will.
no, and the R word was the same thing. There was no ill will behind it, but that word, it's an ugly word. It really, I don't even know where that word came from.
I don't even know what it means.
I always thought it meant like a Mongol from like Genghis Khan and stuff. That's what I thought it was when I was a kid because I heard it so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what are are there any other terms that are as visceral as that one?
No, that's pretty.
I was going to, if you call someone like a Kevin Donaldson, then, I mean, that
hurts.
hurts. That hurts. I mean, nobody ever better call me Kevin.
It would up your status. That's what it would do. You can't call a Labrador a French poodle. It might get offended. But so they know that makes that word worse if they know.
They're very cognizant of everything.
And
They really are. They take in so much. You don't think they're taking things in, but they're grasping everything that's going on around them.
My son, if we drive somewhere, we drive 6 months later, he goes, that's so-and-so, or this is, and you're an hour away.
Yeah.
Like, they're smart.
what is your son specifically diagnosed? What's your son's name?
Jake.
So what's Jake specifically diagnosed with?
Down syndrome, and he has alopecia, which is, no hair.
Lucky.
So that's another thing that,
That kid just doesn't know how lucky he is.
oh, I know.
The greatest line I ever heard was in Happy Days. The older brother, Chuck, comes down, and I forget who. I think he's talking to Richie, and he says, I used to think shaving was cool, but now it's just a drag.
It is.
It really is.
Listen, I wish I had alopecia. I hate hair. I shave my head just because I want it. I don't want to have it.
You don't have alopecia?
Hey, Todd, you're my friend. You're not supposed to laugh at his jokes. You laugh at my jokes, all right?
13% of all Downs have alopecia.
Oh, do they really?
Really?
It's an autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
I didn't know
Yeah, I
that.
didn't know that.
Those are the things you learn as you go along.
My cousin Bobby Doe, he was one of four. He was the youngest because my Aunt Ella had kids a little old.
Late in life.
A little late in life. I know the likelihood of that goes up. But out of his other three siblings, he's the only one left alive. And he's pretty old. Bobby's got to be early 60s, mid 60s.
That puts him up towards the record.
Yeah,
For New Jersey, I think
he's in Florida.
the one article I saw in the paper a couple years ago, she was 69. She was the oldest.
Yeah.
Downs
We
in New
had a
Jersey.
guy growing up in North Arlington. We had a guy with Down syndrome, and the guy's name was Vinny Macaluso, and he was just accepted. He was just one of us. We didn't look down on him. We didn't talk bad about him. He was just one of us. And that's the way I was born and raised.
I don't know if this is good or bad, but one of the swim team members goes out drinking with our guys.
Vinny used to drink with us all the time.
Now, what's that like?
Oh, it's fun. Really, you know what? They're no different than us, though.
They're wise asses.
Oh yeah.
If you actually look up the definition with Down syndrome, they're wise asses.
It's funny you say that because my cousin has absolutely the worst mouth I ever. And I haven't seen him in a long time. Don't get me wrong, but he had absolutely the worst mouth I ever heard on a human being. Every other word was F, every other. It was this. Like he didn't know how to formulate a sentence without those words.
So he grew up in North Jersey.
You know, in Special Olympics all the time, we talk about inclusion, you know, but with this guy, Vinny, that I was talking about, we included him back in the day before we knew what Special
inclusion
Olympics was all
yeah.
about. You know, we just included him into everything we did. You know, it was just, if we were going out, you know, we are going to go hang out one night. I mean, when we were teenagers, we weren't really going out drinking that much anyway.
Yeah.
You know, we'd go out. Tell him to shut up. We'd go out. We'd say, "Hey Ben, come on, we're going." You know,
It's one of the boys.
we'd include him with us, and there was no sign. We never treated him indifferent.
I think growing up, the only kids that really got with any type of special needs were because we didn't know it was the autistic
I
kids.
don't remember much of autism when we were kids.
Well, you know what? When they were autistic back in the day too, or ADD and ADHD, you know, they were just the problem kids.
You know
Yeah.
you know how you know, and everybody grew up with them. There was that one kid growing up
that was off.
It was off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the autistic kid. I could tell you exactly who it was growing up. He used to bring in cat skulls and stuff that he found out in the woods and nail them and paint them and stuff. But he was a brilliant mechanic.
Like say those are
Yeah, they're
serial
traits of
killers.
serial killers. Yeah. But him and his brothers, I think they were all autistic because him and his brothers they made a bicycle. I know this by welding frames together that was at least 10 foot tall with the cranks. One crank would go to another crank. They were amazing engineers.
But
if
we
you-
didn't know what autism was when we
No,
were growing up.
but if
No.
you
I
asked
don't,
never
I don't
heard
know if
that
there was
word.
there was no diagnosis for it back then.
But
No.
if you asked him what he, you know, the normal kids that would at 12 or 13 looking at girls and stuff, he had zero interest. He was just pulled back from society. And everybody growing up, especially people that are our age, knows that at least one person in their town that said, he's a little off. But more than likely it was autism or Asperger's or something like that.
Yeah, the high end.
The high end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Todd, we talked a little bit about your son. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Well, I want to put this out. Growing up in Garfield, across the street from me was a girl named Mary. She's probably early 20s. She had MS real bad. You know, arms all curled up. And
Was she a thalidomide baby?
No,
No.
just the muscles are all
Oh, okay.
contracted, and you know, walked pigeon-toed and all that. And speech was bad. You know, pretty much nonverbal. And
She get
a
picked
lot
on.
of kids were brutal.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Brutal, and I
Kids are
hated
tough.
it. Absolutely hated it, and I think that's kind of early on what formed, you know, my opinions and what I thought. And
Now, when you found out that you had a son with special needs,
that was a bit of a shock.
did that old mindset did your mind change, or were you sort of going in that direction where you're accepting, no, these people are just like everybody else? And I hate calling them these people. That's the wrong terminology. But people with special needs are no different than anybody else. They just need a little extra attention in order
Yes.
to get back to normal.
Some things they're slower than others, and they reach their milestones later in life, like my son did. You know, he didn't talk until he was almost 5, and then he didn't shut up.
When you
I was
first,
gonna say, when you meet Jake, once you start talking to him, he doesn't shut up.
most interesting conversations in the world are people. with
I've
special
actually had better conversations with
Yeah,
him
right.
than some of the cops I used to work with. I hope they're listening.
Yeah. Now, when you first bring this beautiful little baby boy in, and at what age did you know something wasn't what you would see in everyday babies?
Everything from the day he was born.
Such
Did you
as-
know beforehand? Because I know they have all
No.
these different tests now that you could, you know,
So
when a woman's pregnant, you can take these different tests and see if your
See, it's
child has
Down syndrome
Down
markers,
syndrome.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's
which is the most
which now they have to offer you. They didn't when we did it.
yeah.
which is the most stupid test in the world. And I'm going to tell you why. Because I've never met anybody who's had a Down syndrome child or child with Down syndrome who, A, didn't love it more than a regular child. That it just, the children are children. But never want, like, what? Say you were to find out that your wife was pregnant with a child with Down syndrome. What are you going to do?
Keep it.
Absolutely.
Listen, it's God's fate.
Absolutely.
It's God's fate. What are you going to do?
So
You're not going to abort a kid just because he has Down syndrome.
That was the thing too. About 2 years after he was born, they now offer that test. There's like 13 things they can pick up, and they give you the option. And my wife and I both said that even if they said he had Downs, we wouldn't have.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's against our religion, and they're human beings. They're God's children. They're God's special children.
And they're your child. It's your child.
Yeah.
Are you going to take your child's life out of the world before your child is even here just because he's got Down syndrome?
But that's why I think that test is stupid.
Yes.
I do. I think it's a stupid test.
You shouldn't give people the option.
Right. You're having the child. You created a child. It's your responsibility. You're having a child, and it's.
So say you had a atypical child, but he wasn't very bright.
Yeah.
Should he go because
Do
he's not?
they have stupid?
He's not as bright as
Do
you
they have
want him to be.
stupidity tests for kids? Listen, your kid's not going to grow up and be that smart. Do you want to get rid of him now?
He's not going to be a doctor. Sorry.
Exactly.
He's going to turn up to be a cop. No, get rid of him.
But with all the tests that they give prenatal now, I'm not surprised that they're not going to develop a test like that. They're going to have genetic markers. Okay, this one's going to be this, and this one's going to be this, and then you run into this situation where you get to play God and pick and choose. If you're
who comes into the world and who doesn't?
If you're looking for a perfect child, guess what?
They don't exist.
They don't exist. Yeah, I've talked to your father. He's got something different to say.
Hey, listen, God gave me gray hair. That's what I got.
God gave me no hair.
Hey, I'm not dyeing it. You're not growing it.
Now,
Todd, I thought you were my friend. I mean, come
See,
on.
this is what friends do, though.
we just had a whole episode on busting balls, and we're still reeling from it.
And listen, next time we have a Bustin' Balls episode, we should bring Todd in. Todd's one of the best at it.
We grew up on a corner every night, and you were bored, and you just hacked into each other. No mothers, no sisters. We had
No,
rules.
but see, you
Mothers were not off. We
No.
could say anything we wanted about
that
mothers.
would be fights.
Yeah.
you got to realize something. Todd and I are both on the Special Olympics New Jersey Law Enforcement Torture on Committee, and that is a family in itself.
Yes.
And we do nothing but break each other's balls. I mean, I won't see Todd for 5-6 months. First thing we do, it's like, hey Todd, how are you? And next thing, it's straight into busting balls.
Oh, what did I say to one guy? Are you still alive?
Now, you get this baby that you identify as there's something not out of the ordinary with
No,
it.
it was a shock.
Yeah, and what was that conversation between you and your wife? Was Jake your first?
We had twins. Those were our first.
Okay, so Jake is a twin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other twin?